Hello. We'll see how the battery and camera go. I have a feeling this might cut off really early, but anyhow, we are now in part 14 of my testimony slash life story, and I had left you hanging a couple videos ago with me in the Austin State Hospital. I had had myself committed there because I needed a place to stay. I didn't want to be homeless. I didn't want to just go sleep in the alley, and that was kind of my. I just was desperate for sleep, and so anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and finish that episode before I go back in time again to the ashram. Um, First of all, I just would like to say, this is a day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. And I hope you will too. You know, we have so much to look forward to, and a hope that cannot be quenched. Okay, so back to the Austin State Hospital. There I was. They were giving me some kind of drugs. I did take them because I wanted to sleep. That's why I took them. And I did. I slept a lot. In fact, most of my memories there, because I ended up only being there for 3 days, a little less than 3 days. And I had the friend that I had that I mentioned that told me about the day that I was saying that I saw demons outside the windows and trying to come in the doors, that I do not remember at all. She was a trusted friend I had known for a long time, and she is and was a registered nurse, but she also had worked at the Austin State Hospital in the past. She and her partner at the time, who is another old friend of mine. Anyhow, she knew I was there, and she told me later that she came to visit to see how I was doing, but I didn't see her because, they told her I was asleep. And she told them how, oh, I used to work here, and they did whatever people talk about whenever they worked at the same place. And then she said, well, how is she doing? And the person said to her, well, she sleeps a lot and she eats a lot. But past that, we can't figure out why she's here, except for that she thinks she was organizing a nuclear freeze concert. And my friend said she told him, oh, she was organizing a nuclear freeze concert. And anyway, they said, well, she seems fine, and I think sometimes I would go out and talk to the other people that were other patients, but most of the time I was sleeping and eating. And the person also said they thought, I don't know if they said it to me or said it to her, that they thought I had a good effect on the other patients. I don't know why I did, but that's what he said. And there was one guy there that was in for something violent, and boy, the way he walked, he had a harder time walking than Frankenstein. It was so sad to see him. They just had him totally bombed out on, I think I was told it was Thorazine. Anyhow, what happened was, there was a lady that she was a kleptomaniac, and I would wake up in my bed. We had our lockers right behind our head, and she'd be trying to reach into my locker, which was not locked, and tried to open it so she could steal something, and that would wake me up. And I was always It was kind of like having flies that keep come on you. That's what it felt like. It was like, go away, and then she'd come back again. And anyhow, after a couple days, you know, um, I got to be friends with a couple of the counselors that were. Turns out there were weekend. I called them counselors. I don't know what their titles were. Supervisors. There were weekend ones, and then there was other ones that were during the week, during the weekdays. And so I mostly got familiar with the weekend ones. And after my friend had visited and they had that conversation and they found out that I didn't make it up, that I really had been organizing a Nuclear Freeze concert, they took a little bit different attitude toward me. And we became friends. I became friends with one of the guys who ended up borrowing $10 from me and paying me back before I left. And then another one was a really nice young lady, and she had a very unusual name. I'm just going to say the name Janelle, but I don't know if that was her name, but it was something I'd never heard before. She was really nice, and she would be talking to me about herself and her life, and she said, you know, I'm dating the guy who's the supervisor for this whole wing. He's the supervisor during the week, but it's a secret because we're not allowed to date each other here. And she was really nice. I really liked her. And so it got to be Sunday evening, and I was starting to think, how am I gonna, I got to get out of here because I've got to get to work. You know, tomorrow's Monday, and I might be able to take Monday off, but, you know, I've got to get back to the law office I was working at. And so they said, well, you'll have to talk to the guy who's the manager or supervisor of the wing. He'll be in Monday morning. So I went in Monday morning, and I said, well, I've been here since Friday night, and I need to get out today because I've got to get back to work. And he was, in my opinion, he acted like a real jerk. I didn't like him at all. His whole countenance and attitude was very arrogant and very condescending and very not nice. And he said, oh, no, you don't. I have to observe you for a couple of weeks before I can even think about whether you're going to leave. And I was so naive. When I went in, I didn't even ask. I didn't know that once you got yourself in by a court order, there had to be, you know, that what you couldn't just walk out. I just figured I checked myself in, so I should be able to check myself out. That's how naive I was about the whole thing. And so he made it clear to me that no, it doesn't work that way. And I did something that I'm not proud of, but I really felt like I had to do. And maybe I should repent for it. I'm not sure, to tell you the truth. I'd like to know your opinion. But anyhow, I was sitting there thinking, okay, I've got to get out. How am I going to get out? And I found myself, and I never do what I'm about to do. What I did was I kind of blackmailed him. And I had never blackmailed anybody to my knowledge in my whole life, and I was very against a blackmail, emotional blackmail, any of that. And I said, what's her name? Is it Janelle? And he looked up. He said, has she been talking to you? And I said, oh, I'll never tell. And about 3 hours later, I was given my papers that I could get out of there. And then they had given me a new prescription for drugs to take. And my car was out in the parking lot, and I just went out and got in the parking lot and drove home and got ready for going to work the next day. Probably called in to tell him I was sick that day or something. And it was something I have to tell you that's so interesting to me. I told you that I really still believe that God spoke to me through the thunder. That was before I ended up totally flipping out and going to the all that stuff that happened where I ended up in the state hospital. And God, it was like I was looking up and I was hearing the thunder way up high, and it was so strong and so powerful and so majestic. And it made me tremble. I don't remember being afraid though, because I knew it was God, and I felt like awe inspired. And like I said, I do not remember what he said. However, what I find to be very interesting is it was only really a matter of hours or a day before I ended up in that Austin hospital that this happened. And in that Austin hospital, I found myself saying the Lord's Prayer over and over again. Every time I would wake up from another nap, I would say the Lord's Prayer, and then I maybe take a nap again, and I'd wake up and say the Lord's Prayer again. And I mean, I was saying it multiple times a day. And what's so unusual about that is that I hadn't said the Lord's Prayer to my memory for probably 18 years or 17 years. I was not a praying person. But I think that something the Lord said to me through the thunder was a catalyst to let me know to say the Lord's Prayer. And the only reason I knew the Lord's Prayer was because when I had lived with my paternal grandparents in East Texas, the school that I went to, it was 6th grade. I guess it was about 1964. 63, 64, and prayer had already been taken out of the schools by the courts or whatever, but some parts of the South were slow in obeying that. And every morning before the Pledge of Allegiance, we would say the Lord's Prayer. And because I went to that school for, I guess 6 months or so altogether, maybe longer, I learned the Lord's Prayer. That's how I learned it, because of prayer in school. I did not learn it anywhere else. And I liked it. I liked that prayer. Anyway, it was something that was, because we said it every single day, 5 days a week, week after week, I had it memorized. And that's why I knew the Lord's Prayer. And I wanted to point out, I can't remember the name of the book right now. I'll be reviewing it again in the future. But it's written by a guy who talks about the first century Christians. And in his research, he found that the first century Christians used to say the Lord's Prayer 3 times a day. And he talked about different stories of people today that once they start saying the Lord's Prayer, I think he recommends every morning and every night, but more is always okay. People's lives would change in such big ways. People who had been having really bad nightmares and all kinds of different manifestations of demonic or evil things got fixed. They were fine. And that's so interesting to me, because also when I'm going to jump into the future just for a quick second, when I finally came back to Jesus the third time that stuck in 2013, I immediately started saying the Lord's Prayer every day. And I've been doing that for the last 12 years. And it's very interesting to me, because I've always wondered, why don't I have nightmares? Why don't I? Because I keep hearing that of Christians having these really bad problems with nightmares and seeing demonic things in their bedrooms and all of this. And I just haven't had hardly any problem with that. And I couldn't figure out why. It's not because I hadn't been dedicating myself to Jesus. And I think it's the Lord's Prayer. I really do. So I wanted to just share that with you. I think that's a really big deal. So anyway, there I am back in the Austin State Hospital. And before I got out, I ended up on the phone with the lady who had been my assistant. And she was a total volunteer assistant for the nuclear freeze. She was such a sweetheart. And she was Catholic, or she was brought up Catholic, and from Houston. And I guess I called her, and she said that she had heard things about me that sounded like I went crazy, and she was kind of scared, had been kind of scared to talk to me. But then once I got on the phone and I was suggesting to her that we say the Lord's Prayer together, she felt like a peace about it. It was like, oh, you are okay. You're saying the Lord's Prayer. And so she and I were actually, it kind of healed the invisible rift that had come between me and her. So apparently there were, I don't know how many people, but there was one or more people that were people that I knew that were calling people and telling them that I went crazy. And I did. I mean, temporarily crazy, I guess you could call it that. But it was very drug related. And I'd say also very demonic. Anyhow. So she and I decided, well, we've had a real setback here, but let's keep working on it. We decided we're just going to keep working on this concert. And so then I got out, and it was so strange because, okay, I told you they gave me a prescription for medicine. And for some reason, I wasn't feeling paranoid about the medicine, and both the institution, the state hospital, and my friends, including my friend that was the nurse, were telling me, be sure to take your medicine, be sure to take your meds. And I was sure to say, look, I want to make sure this isn't Thorazine, because I saw what Thorazine did to that guy. And they said, oh no, it's not Thorazine, and it's just something totally different. And everybody was so insistent that I take it. I thought, okay, make everybody happy. And I started taking that stuff. And it's so weird because very soon, I don't remember exactly how soon, but I'd say just within a day or two, I couldn't find my friend Dee, the one that had been my assistant. And then I found out from a relative of hers that they thought she had gone crazy, and she was put in a Catholic mental institution in Houston. I never talked to her or saw her again for decades after that. And then, later when I realized that I had been drugged by people who didn't want that concert to happen, then I realized they also drugged her to make sure it didn't continue. I feel certain of that. And sadly, for Dee, she kept whatever they gave her as meds. She was taking it. She was afraid. She believed that she was crazy or something, and she had not been crazy at all. I mean, when I was around her, nothing about her that was crazy. And before that happened, I guess it was at least a week after I got out. Maybe it was more than a week after I got out of the state hospital that she disappeared. And during that week, I found that the meds I was taking were so strong, and I had a terrible reaction to them. I did not feel comfortable sitting down. I was not comfortable laying down. I was not comfortable standing up. And it was really hard to walk. It was hard to use my motor skills. Something like simple as making a sandwich. If I just had a loaf of bread and mayonnaise and some deli meat in the fridge, for instance, that putting that together, just even thinking about putting that together seemed so hard. It was so hard to do. And I was begging my Max, I was begging Max to make a sandwich for me. He was used to me fixing him food, but he had never fixed me food, and he refused. But I managed to make myself sandwiches, but it was not easy. And also, I'm a person that likes to check the mail every day. We lived in a place where we had our own mailbox in front of our little yard in front of the house. It wasn't a very long walk to the mailbox, maybe 30 feet. And I couldn't walk to the mailbox. That was too much for me. That's how messed up my whole motor skills were. And I couldn't feel all right no matter what I did. It was terrible. And people kept reminding me, keep taking your meds, keep taking your meds. And I just realized I've got to get off these meds. I've got to totally get off these meds. I've got to get them out of my system, because I could tell they were doing this to me. But I had no support from Max or any of my close friends at that time, except for Dee, the one who had been being my assistant. And she said, oh, you can come stay at my house for a couple days. Her husband was out of town for some reason, and it was just really handy. She had a nice house she lived in. And so I did. I went and stayed with her for a couple days, and all I did was drink water, and can't remember now, I might have drank some fruit juice. I think I drank some fruit juice, but I don't think I even ate. I was just trying to wash out those meds. And there was a third person we had met during trying to put together that concert, who was some kind of a producer on stages at events, and he was a frequent visitor and very supportive of my getting off those meds. And it was amazing. It took about, I'd say 2 days, maybe 3, and I felt normal again. I could get up and walk. I could walk around the block. I could cook. I could do anything. I was like my normal self again. It was so great. And I'm still so thankful to Dee for giving me a place where I could do that. And so anyhow, unfortunately, she didn't. I wish she had noticed all that, and I wish she had decided to get off the meds that they gave her. Because when I talked to her decades later, somehow I found her very briefly, and she told me that she was still, 20 years, 30 years later, she was still taking the meds that they had given her. And I was very sad to hear that. And, I told her what I thought about them, but it just didn't work. And so anyway, that is the end of that particular episode, except to say that I started just trying to get my life back together again, and it wasn't going very well. The roommates that had been there had moved out. The rent was up for me and Max. We each had to pay more. I always paid my half of everything. And I just knew I had to leave. I just couldn't stay with him anymore. He was still into Aleister Crowley, and he was into that, there's a guy that was a famous Freemason, what was his name? He wrote a book called The Secrets of the Ages. Either secret plural or secret singular. And boy, he loved that book, and I never ever saw Max do anything like a ritual. I never suspected that he was getting together with others that were into that stuff. I'm sure if I had seen that or known that, I would have left him a lot sooner. And I really, to this day, have no idea. When he wanted to hide something, he was really good at it. But anyhow, uh, I couldn't get happy again. I knew I had to leave, and I told him I've got to leave. I'm sorry, but this is not going to work for me. And he broke down. I couldn't stand to see a man cry, so I stayed. And then I was like, oh, what am I going to do? And then I realized I stayed with him for, I guess, a few months. We moved again. We moved to a garage apartment. And, when I was in the state hospital, I had them take out my copper 7 IUD that I had in my body for a few years to keep from getting pregnant. And I remember the doctor said, you know what they call people who get their IUD taken out? And I said, what? And he said, parents. Well, he was right. I ended up getting pregnant very soon, and I just didn't feel like I could have that baby, and I didn't see abortion as murder. I didn't see it the way I see it now, as that every child that is born in a womb is precious and a gift from God. I didn't see it that way. I just thought it was a little appendage in my body that wasn't a person yet. That's the way I looked at it. As long as you did the abortion in less than 12 weeks, it wasn't a person yet. And I was very adamantly believed that. And even though I really wanted to have children, not like this, not without a partner and with everything all messed up, and I decided to have an abortion. Also because I knew how Max was. Even though he didn't want to have children yet and he didn't want to be married yet, I knew that if I did have a baby, that he would never ever let me take that baby away from him. It would be his. He would see it as his baby. And I realized that if I had a baby, I would have a stronger connection with him for the rest of our lives, which I just I didn't want to face. I can't say I couldn't, because I do regret so much that I had an abortion. And that second abortion I had after we had moved to the other apartment. During that time, there was a point where Max had wrecked my car, and I couldn't drive it because it was too wrecked. And he kept saying he was going to fix it, and I kept trying to not nag, but try to get him to fix it because I needed the car to work so that I could escape. And finally, he fixed it, and I had the abortion, and it was the worst experience. It was not only, even though they said that they gave me gas and things to take away the pain, I felt the pain extremely strongly. I really felt like whoever did that, the medical side of it, I really felt like he was a sadist and that he wanted me to hurt. I was screaming during it, and I just hate to think of what that baby felt. It was terrible. But then, and I didn't think of the baby having feelings back then, I really didn't. And then after the abortion, they would have you go into a room that had it was kind of dimly lit, and it had some beds that you could lay on a single bed and just kind of let some time go by, drink a little bit of orange juice to get your blood sugar back or something, and and rest before you left the clinic. And I laid on that bed, and I felt a spirit disconnect from my womb and fly away. I couldn't see it visually, but I could feel it. I could feel it flying away. And I could feel how much I loved that person, whoever it was, that soul, that spirit. It was somebody, it felt like it was like somebody I knew more than I ever knew anybody, and I loved more than I ever loved anybody. And it was gone. It flew away, and I became hysterical. And one of the workers at the abortion clinic came up to me and was, what's the matter? Because I was crying so hard and loud. And I told her what happened, and she said, well, you might just want to think about that. And so anyway, after that happened, I was extremely depressed. I was already depressed before, but now I was more depressed. But Max finally fixed my car. It had a fender that had been totally crashed in, and my insurance had covered for whatever had to be covered for the other driver that he got in the wreck with, and it covered it even though he was driving the car instead of me, but it did not cover the repairs on my car. So he went to junkyards and found the fender that he needed to get. It was a white car. He could only find a gold fender. So we called the car Gold Fender, because at the time, there was a famous movie called Goldfinger, so we called it Gold Fender. Anyhow, so he had gotten that fixed, and I was so depressed, and I know I needed to leave him. And I just didn't know how. And then I got a letter from the IRS. Another thing Max had done, he'd badgered me to not pay my taxes, telling me what a fool I was to pay my taxes. Now, I'm responsible for what I do. It's not only his fault, because I should have done what I thought instead of what he thought or everything. But anyway, I had not paid any taxes, and I was a contract worker. Hadn't paid any taxes for, I guess, a couple of years. And so the IRS was sending me a letter saying, you better pay these up. You better pay up soon, or you may be facing a prison sentence. It said something to that effect. So that really helped my depression get hooked in. And then I was just thinking, what am I going to do? I need to get out of this. Need to get away from this man. I need to pay the IRS. I don't want to go to prison. And Max always hated it unless I was acting cheerful. If I ever acted depressed, it really, really bothered him. So I used to try to act cheerful when I didn't feel like it. So I came up with a plan with the help of a good friend. It was that same nurse who agreed I needed to get away from him, and she would give me moral support on the phone. And my plan was, I think I had talked to my maternal grandmother, and she told me that I could come live with her, and I would only need to pay my part of the bills, and she'd let me live there free while I paid back the IRS. That was so wonderful. She lived about, I guess, 400 miles away up in North Texas. And so I hatched a plan, and the plan was that I would start acting in such a way that I knew Max didn't like, so he wouldn't like being around me as much. And I think I was very effective in that. I knew exactly how to act, which was basically how I felt. That's how I started acting, how I felt. And he didn't like that. And then I told him I'm just going to go live with my grandmother for 6 months. I was lying, and I knew I was lying, but I was afraid that if I told him the truth, that I wasn't going to come back, that he'd find a way to emotionally make me stay. So I didn't tell him this time. And my friend had told me, whatever you take, don't expect to get anything else back. But you've only got to take some certain things with you because you don't want it to be obvious that you're not coming back. So that's what I did. I packed up stuff that, some clothes and some things that I didn't want to part with, and I left behind a lot of things I really liked, but I wanted it to look like I was coming back. And, there's only so much room in a car anyway. And, I told him I'm going to go live with my grandmother for the 6 months and pay the IRS, and then I'll be back. And he had no interest in helping me pay the IRS, and I knew that. So, and then between that and the way I was acting, he didn't like that. And I felt bad because I knew I was leaving him, and I knew he didn't like to be alone. So I did something that at the time was very out of character for me, but I called the woman that he had been with after I had left him the last time, who had suggested that we share him, that woman. I knew that she still liked him. She seemed to always be in semi-pursuit of him. And so I called her up, and I told her that I was going to go stay with my grandmother, and I'd be gone 6 months, and I was worried that Max would be lonely, and I wanted to encourage her to come around. I don't know what she thought, because that's not something that a jealous person who's hated you because they're jealous usually acts, but she didn't give me any guff about it, and she just said, oh, okay, whatever. And then when I left, I remember I drove down the street, and I just broke down crying. I cried for the longest time while I was driving. It's strange how even leaving somebody who you felt very emotionally abused by and all of that, it was so hard. It was one of the hardest things I ever did was leaving him. I know it doesn't seem to make any sense, but it's true. And so I drove up to where my grandmother lived, and she lived in a small house. Nowadays it might be considered a high quality shack. It was a very small house. It was a house, and it had 2 bedrooms, and it had 2 bathrooms, but I always used the one that was with the bedroom I had, so I can't even remember the other bathroom, but I'm sure there was oh yeah, I remember now. Okay, I had a little half bathroom that went with the bedroom she let me stay in that used to be my grandfather's bedroom. And she had been living alone there for a while, and she was in the back bedroom, and she had the main bathroom. But the house it was funny, it was like a tilt. You could tell when you walked in that the floorboards were all kind of like angled, either up or down, but it was all kind of lopsided, and it was small, and it was old, and she lived very frugally. She had a fear of not having enough money for a good nursing home when she got old. That was the reason she was saving money. And she taught me how to save money in a big way. It was very interesting. We would only buy things at the store if they were on sale or absolute necessities, like toilet paper. And she couldn't drive anymore because the last time she had driven, she had caused a wreck. She had been taught the wrong way to drive, where she had her left foot on the brake and her right foot on the gas pedal. That's a recipe for having wrecks, I think. Anyway, so I was the one that would drive and go get the groceries and all of that. And I got a job right away. I needed to get work. I knew that the best paying jobs I could get would be legal secretary. And there was only one ad in the paper. It was not a big town at the time. It was Denton, Texas, where North Texas University is. And they had no bus system and no taxis. If you didn't have your own car, you were just out of luck. I never ever lived in a town like that before or since, I don't think. But anyway, I had that car. And there was one job in the paper for a legal secretary, and I applied for it. And I got the job. And I really want to hurry up and get to the part where I came to Jesus, so I'm going to kind of hurry through this, I think. I didn't know anyone other than my grandmother. There was a lady I met that lived across the street who let it be known right away when I met her that she was a Christian, which I didn't like, because I thought of Christians as being narrow-minded and judgmental. And I remember making a note to myself, okay, I'm going to keep arm's length away from her. She seemed really nice and she acted really sweet, but I didn't trust or like Christians. And so it was like, okay, well, somebody who's not going to be my friend, kind of how I looked at it, even though she was kind of close to my age, just a few years older than me. She lived in a big house across the street. She was a single mom of 2 or 3 children. Anyhow, I didn't have any friends in that town, but my biological mother and her, what used to be new husband, but now they'd been married a long time, had actually moved back to Denton, Texas. They didn't ever come visit. They didn't visit my grandmother, and but she knew they were there, and I knew they were there, and they had my half-sister, who I had not known, didn't know I existed till she was 9. So she was not very happy to find out that me and my brother existed, because she had been the princess and the only child, and I guess, I don't know if that's why, but that's what it seemed like. And but she kind of got over it pretty. She was real sweet. The younger she was, the sweeter she was. And I think at that time she was not 9 anymore. She was well, let's see, she's 15, 17, 19, 13. She was 13 years younger than me, and I was 29, so what would that make her? About 16. I guess she was about 16 years old at that point. And so she had known for 7 years that I existed, but we didn't know each other. And I got in touch with my mother and my biological mother there. And I just wanted to know her. I just wanted to, I'd been all my life wishing I had my mother, and there she was. And I asked if I could see her. And she said that now that I didn't need her, it was okay. Which really cut me like a knife. I thought that was a really weird thing to say. But anyway, I started visiting her every weekend. And her husband and my half-sister were there too. Every time I came, they were always all 3 there. And my mother was very she just was not a motherly person. I don't know how else to put it. She's not nurturing or motherly, but she was nice. You know, she acted nice, and she was a real good cook. And I really wanted to get to know my half sister, but I made a big mistake in telling her something she really didn't want to hear, which was how her grandparents, through her dad, had been so mean to me when I was 8 years old, because she had been saying how they were the nicest people on the whole planet, and my mother had told me that I have too many stories. I'm trying to hurry through them. My mother and hers, I heard both of them tell their sides of the story. But what happened was that my biological mother had converted to Catholicism, not her husband, just her. And she said it was because of Mary, because she wanted kind of like today's feminism. Everybody wants to have a woman be in charge these days in the culture. Anyway, it was because of Mary that she converted to Catholicism, and she got infatuated by a priest. This is when they were still in Southern California. And my little sister had picked up the phone and listened in on their phone conversation, in which my mother was telling the priest that she wanted to have his baby. And my sister, both of them basically told me the same story, so I do believe it's true, and they didn't know that the other one had told me. My sister was outraged. How could you cheat on my father? She was much closer to her father. He was very doting of her, and he was not close to our biological mother. And that did it. She blackmailed our mother, our biological mother, and she told her that when we moved to Texas, if you don't give, and it was her grandfather had passed away, but she still had the grandmother. She says, if you don't give the grandmother that nice bedroom and the wing of the house, then I'm going to tell my dad what you did. And my mother told me that she said, well, I couldn't succumb to blackmail. That would be a bad way of teaching her, so I couldn't do that. I couldn't let her strong arm me with blackmail, so I did not do what she wished. And she said ever since then, then my sister told her dad, let the cat out of the bag, because she did not get what she wanted. And then they had both been hating on my biological mother every year since. And one of the things they would do is whenever it was her birthday, they would never say happy birthday or get her a gift or anything. They just would hate on her. And then my biological mother became a real estate agent. She was always working to make money and being Catholic. Anyway, so there was a big divide in that family, and I sure didn't find any of the love that I was still looking for when I went to their house, but I did at least get a few questions answered in my mind. Like my biological mother told me that you've got to understand, I was afraid of your father. That kind of surprised me, but she was only 5'3", and my dad was 12 inches taller than her, as well as 12 years older than her. So, I can see how she'd feel very overpowered by him. And she said, and I knew he wouldn't hurt you kids. That kind of made me angry, because he was because it was like, how do you know? Anyway, but I didn't act angry. I just took it in. And then also at one point, her husband said to me, well, you got to understand, I did not want to be paying for another person's children. And at that point, actually, my biological father had made it pretty obvious that he wasn't going to be really good at paying child support. And so that's another reason that was given of why they gave us back to my father, and I guess it was her new husband's jealousy or something, that, or maybe being protective of her, I don't know, that they cut us off completely. And so anyway, I learned all that, and it was not as fulfilling as I had hoped, but anyway, that had all been going on. And then I got that only job for a legal secretary, and then a day came where it was a very small law office with only 2 attorneys. I was the only secretary, and I think there was another assistant that came in every once in a while. Don't remember much about her. And but it was on the top floor of a bank. And it turned out that he was also the attorney for that bank. And I got, on my birthday, which is in October, and I had only been there since sometime in August, I got a birthday present from the IRS, which was a letter or 2 threatening that if I didn't pay them within 6 weeks, I could be put in prison. And I think I owed something like $1,500. And I sure didn't have that money. And so I ended up, I thought, well, I work for the attorney that is the attorney for this bank, and the top guy of the bank would often come up to the office and they would be talking, and so he saw me a lot and all of that. And I thought, well, it's worth asking, because I had no credit or anything like that. And I went and talked to him, and I asked him for a loan from the bank, and I told him why. And I remember him saying, well, you do need the money, don't you? And he said, I didn't have anything good for collateral. My car certainly wasn't worth anything. But he gave me the loan, and I had a thing where I had to pay a certain amount every month, and or more every month, and then get it all paid off. And he said it was real important that I make those payments. And that was something I could do as long as I had a job. And he gave me the loan. And really soon after he gave me that loan, the attorney that I was working for said to me, do you know what a sheriff looks like? And I said, well, yeah, I think so. And he said, well, there's going to be a sheriff coming up here in the next couple days, and he'll probably could be coming more than once. And I'm going to keep my door closed. His office I was in sort of an open office in the front, and then the 2 attorneys were both behind doors that were usually open, but they could close them. And he said, I'm going to keep my office closed for the next couple weeks, and every time he comes to give me a subpoena, I want you to tell him I'm not here. And then I said, well, can't you just stay at home so I won't be lying to him? And he said, no, I've got to be here. I've got things to do. And I happen to have heard, I know it sounds like I'm making this all up, but I'm not. This is my real life story. This really happened, all this stuff. Anyway, when I had been working for that last lawyer in Austin, Texas, I remember reading an article in the newspaper where a legal secretary was put in jail because she had lied to a sheriff for her boss. And I don't remember any other details of that story, but that really impressed me. And one of the decisions I made when I left Max, because I remember had one specific, it was sort of a nightmare, that he had gotten busted for drugs, and so I was in trouble too. And I woke up from that dream and I already knew I was planning to leave him, and I thought, I am never going to put myself in a situation again where I will end up having to go to jail because of what somebody else did. And so anyway, there I am back in Denton, Texas, and this lawyer I was working for, I said, well, I can't do that because, and I told him the story about the legal secretary in Austin who had been put in jail for doing something very similar, and I wouldn't do it. And then he kind of relented for an hour or two, and then he'd call me in again and ask me again, and he asked me 2 or 3 times, and I just wouldn't do it. And then he talked to the other attorney there, who was a junior attorney, a female, and he talked to her, and she called me into her office, and she was trying to relate to me. She was saying, well, you're a free spirit, aren't you? I don't know what it was about me. Maybe I couldn't figure out why people thought I was a free spirit. I was a legal secretary, but I guess there were things about me that people could just tell. And I said, yeah, I wasn't used to thinking of myself that way, but I couldn't say that I wasn't, because it was somebody that didn't have hardly any boundaries. And anyway, she tried to talk me into it, and I still wouldn't do it. And so that finally, by the end of that day, I got called in by the senior attorney again, the one who had hired me. And he said, how much money do we owe you now for how many days you've worked? And it was something like $190, and I told him that amount. And he wrote out a check for exactly that much and handed it to me, and he said, goodbye. So I was fired for refusing to lie to him. And lied to the sheriff. And I immediately went and looked in the newspaper, and once again there was one job opening for a legal secretary, which is the way I could make the most money. And I applied to that job and told them, on my resume that I had worked for this other guy for however long it had been, probably 6 months. And I told him the truth as to why I didn't have a job there anymore. And he hired me. I was so surprised. Later he told me that the reason he hired me was because he had just been to a party like the week before where the other attorney who had just fired me had been there, and he was telling people that, maybe a couple weeks before, he was telling people there that he had the best secretary he had ever had. That was me. He was talking about me, and he was telling them that I was the best secretary he had ever had. And so the very first person who had fired me turned out to be my best recommendation. Anyway, so I got that job, and that was just a one-person office. It was, well, two-person. There was the attorney and me. And it was, while I was working there was a guy who would come in. Many people would come in to get divorces. I don't know how it is now, but back then, the bread and butter for most attorneys that I'd ever been around was divorces. That's lots of divorces, and that's how they keep money going when they don't get other cases. And I was always typing up divorces, and it was very depressing. It was really upsetting to me. These two people who got together, who supposedly loved each other more than anybody else in the world, and then when they would get divorced, how nasty they were to each other. And there'd be pages and pages of such petty things, like, well, the ex-wife gets the yellow couch and the blue painting, and it would just go on pages and pages. It was like, why can't they at least, just agree on what they're going to separate with? And why have to make a big thing anyway? It was very depressing. And I didn't like typing up divorces. And then that attorney started trying to turn me into a paralegal so that I could figure out how to type up these divorces without having to even talk to him, because it was kind of a basic form. And he was trying to teach me to be a paralegal. I didn't really want to be a paralegal, but anyway. And he was, unfortunately, a lech. And so it was not fun working there, but otherwise he was a nice enough guy. And I met this one guy who'd come in to get a divorce, and he was not attractive to me, but I didn't have any friends, and I didn't have anybody I was dating. I was just, I just wanted to meet people and stuff. And he ended up asking me for a date, and I accepted. And during this time, I was reading a lot of Dennis Wheatley novels. I don't know if you've ever heard of Dennis Wheatley, but I think he's extremely famous in the UK. He was from the UK, and it was a big deal in the UK. And a lot of his books ended up over in the US, but I don't think he's very famous here. But I was always getting books at used bookstores, and the Dennis Wheatley books kind of fascinated me because they were always about people getting possessed or hunted down by the devil, weird stuff, and then what they would do, the different ways that the so-called Christians would do rituals to try to drive away the demons. It was very weird. It wasn't good. It was not the right way to get rid of demons and devils. I had no idea that it wasn't, but it was very Catholic oriented and ritual oriented, holy water. And I don't know, he just wrote one book after another, and I was kind of fascinated by it at that time that I was dating this new guy. I'll just call him Sullivan. And Sullivan and I ended up talking about, I told him how I thought it was kind of fascinating about those rituals and things. And he told me, he said, they have rituals, satanic rituals here in this town. I said, really? And he said, yeah. He said, I said, how do you know? And he said, well, I saw one. There's this, rocks that I hid behind, and I saw them doing their satanic stuff. And he drove me out to kind of show me the basic area where the satanic ritual that he saw had happened. And I thought that was interesting and strange. It was creepy but interesting. And he told me that he was there was a prophecy made when he was born or something like that he was going to either be very, very good or very, very bad. And I was always looking on the bright side. I thought, oh, good. Well, maybe it's going to be very, very good. But I ended up revealing to him some of my darker desires, which were becoming darker and darker regarding sexuality. It was immoral. I like I said, I didn't think of sex as immoral at all. And I still didn't, but I was starting to have kind of wild fantasies that were outside. They were very dangerous. It would have been especially dangerous for me. And it was still, again, it was me. I wanted love, and I don't know. I got it twisted in my brain that you got love from sex, and that the more a man wanted you sexually, the more he loved you. That I was really, that was just deeply embedded in me. And he was willing to go along with one of my fantasies, and he was just about to do it. And I'm not going to say what it was, but I said, no, no, let's not do it. You know, at the last minute, I was like, no, I didn't. And anyhow, I had been dating him, and then now we're getting to the part where I come to Jesus. Um, I had a temporary job after. There's a point where I quit that job at that law firm with the lecherous attorney, and it was mostly because he was really pushing me being a paralegal, and he didn't know that I didn't even have a high school education, and it was hard for me. He thought it would be easy, but there were some things I just didn't understand, and he wasn't patient enough to explain, and I just didn't want to work there anymore. And by that point, I had paid enough of my debt to that bank that, which, you know, of course, the loan from the bank means that I paid the money to the IRS in time, and I was no longer in fear of going to prison. And then now I had gotten to the point where I had pretty much paid back the bank, and I think I'd totally paid it back by then. And so I quit that job, and I started doing temporary jobs. But this was a smaller town. There wasn't many secretarial jobs. I did get a couple secretarial jobs through like Kelly Girl or whatever it was, but there wasn't really enough jobs. And so I started doing other temporary jobs, like giving out free pieces of pizza at grocery stores. It was all for a company, the company that sold Tony's Pizza and Red Baron. And they'd give me a little pizza oven and a table and everything, so I could go to different stores each week and set it all up and give people samples of either Tony's Pizza or Red Baron. And there was a guy that worked there, that kind of headquarters place where I would go get the pizzas and things like that. And he was he did manual labor for them, picking up a lot of heavy things and putting it in trucks or whatever. And there was a sort of immediate attraction between the two of us, and I did not know it, but he was married. And what else is really weird about this is that he wore a wedding ring. I never saw it. I was in a lifelong habit of not looking to see if a man was wearing a wedding ring. The excuse I had in my mind was that first guy that I had ever lived with, he wore one and swore that he was not married. And so I didn't. If you could wear a wedding ring and not be married, then what use does it do to look to see if there's a wedding ring? I don't know. But I never did. It was so weird. I don't remember even once ever noticing. Over a period of many years, I would never notice if a guy was wearing a wedding ring or not when I'd first meet him or whatever. But anyway, turns out he was wearing one, but I didn't see it. And then we ended up starting to have an affair, and he was really, I felt a lot of lustful feelings toward him. And the Max had mailed me a joint, which is like a marijuana cigarette, and I had just stuck it in my drawer, a Chester drawer, because I wasn't smoking anymore. I was so glad not to be smoking pot anymore. I was smoking cigarettes again, not in the house, but I was smoking cigarettes, and I had told this guy, this new guy, married man, that he had offered me some marijuana, and I told him I don't like to smoke it. It makes me paranoid. I don't like it. And then he was like, really? You don't? It was like, people who really like marijuana, they just can't understand why you wouldn't want to smoke it. And I told him, I said, no, I have, in fact, I have a whole joint in my Chester drawer. It's been there for months, and I don't want it. And he was like, really? Really? You have it in that drawer and you're not? It was kind of like he was trying to tempt me to smoke it. And then this one night, I called him, or he called me. I think that's how it always worked, was he called me. And for the first time, maybe the only time in my life, well, not exactly the only time, I had phone sex with him. And he was teasing me again about the marijuana cigarette. And I think right after I had the phone sex with him, I went and got that joint out, and I thought, I wonder how, now that I haven't smoked any marijuana for 6 months, I wonder what it would be like if I smoked some. And I smoked about half of it. And my grandmother had already gone to bed. I think it was about 9 o'clock at night. And it was so weird. Nothing has ever happened to me before or since like this. But these thoughts would come in my head that were terrifying and not like me, not thoughts that I would usually have. It was somebody's gonna come to kill you, they're on their way right now. You know, I really don't remember all the thoughts, but that was kind of the main thing, was that there was all these different people. They were coming to kill me. I had no idea why, and it was terrifying. And it was so weird because I believed everything, every thought that came in my head with that, all that stuff. I believed it. I 100% fell for it. And I was in terror. And then after about 5 minutes, I was back in my right mind. And I was like, whoa, what was that? Those were not my thoughts. Where did that come from? What is that? And I was trying to figure out what it was. And then after about 5 more minutes, it happened again. And then when it happened again, I would totally have no memory of having just been in my right mind. And I was back to totally believing everything they said. And it was like, oh, you know, now there's a helicopter's